So I'm going to go through a couple of themes this morning. I want to talk about this evolving landscape that we have right now for transplant. We're going to spend some time, obviously, talking about machine perfusion, and then I'm going to split the talk out a little bit more and really speak to AI and how it can help us out. And then finally, I'll finish up just talking about some alternative liver sources and sort of a vision towards the future of what we have going here. So. To start, we'll talk about sort of the evolving landscape, which we're all familiar with. I'm going to focus on the United States as I am most familiar with that. So here in the United States, this is a figure from the OPTN SRTR 2023 data, looking at patients that are on the wait list, those that receive the donor and the success of those transplants. And so if we update just a couple of years later in 2025, we have about 12,000 liver transplants performed here in the United States with very good 1 in 5 year survival historically. And on the active wait list at any given time, it's about 8,000 to 10,000. Currently, it's about 8,600, 8,800, somewhere in that time frame. But unfortunately, about 1,200 or so die every year, and they're removed from the wait list or they're too sick to pursue a liver transplant. And so, just in general, when we talk about transplant in the United States, this success that we've experienced here in the US has driven the demand kind of beyond the supply. And this sort of has defined the modern era and something that we have been battling here in the US over definitely the last decade, and in hopes to, and hopefully we can help, narrow this gap. So, what's going on here when we talk about that? So, we have this changing epidemiology with the advent of our direct acting antivirals. We have seen just a huge drop in hepatitis C, as you can see here in this SRTR report, and that's by the blue triangles, and there's been a reciprocal rise in alcohol-associated liver disease, particularly severe, like acute alcohol-associated hepatitis, as well as MASLD, which is now the fastest growing indication worldwide. We're also seeing a rise in liver cancer, and that is partially driven by the MASLD epidemic. And then we also just have increasingly recognized acute-on-chronic liver failure as something that is quite severe in our population and something that we hope to transplant given the very high mortality that's associated with this condition. To talk about ALD first, I mean, it is now the #1 indication for liver transplant in the United States, and unfortunately is disproportionately affecting young women and our Latino Hispanic patients. And there have been just huge increases in early liver transplantation for severe alcohol-associated hepatitis, starting with the landmark trials that came out of France. And now just the large number of studies that have been done, and the Accelerate platform consortium here in the United States, we have just seen this huge rise. And so this is a paper out of JAMA Open that just looks at the rise in both liver transplants for acute alcohol-associated hepatitis, as well as candidates that were added to the wait list, and just this incredible rise. This one focuses around the COVID pandemic, where we really saw a large jump in the amount of alcohol that was consumed. If you were to extend this graph out, I would say that I was hoping that it would be less, but unfortunately it has remained this way despite us being past this pandemic period. And there's still some persistent barriers to equitable access. We don't have any objective predictors of alcohol relapse. The center policies are all over the place. We've kind of universally abandoned the 6-month rule, but still each individual center is different here. There's obviously stigma amongst patients and providers, and then we still have insurance and coverage disparities that come with this. And it really has this unique equity burden, right? I mean, we historically denied it based on these sobriety requirements. We don't have national standards or anything like that. I talked about this center level variation. So what's really needed, and this is something that's really ongoing here, not just in the U.S. but worldwide, is validated objective predictors of alcohol relapse, a big major research gap. Maybe even potentially national standards for minimum selection criteria. and then trying to integrate, things like addiction medicine and psychiatry into transplant programs, which is a big ask, right? That takes resources and money, and it's not available everywhere. Definitely improving insurance coverage for patients, especially for addiction treatment that they need both pre and arguably post-transplant. And then working on this idea of destigmatizing this issue that just that these patients are very, very sick, and there are some that do very, very well with transplant. So the other big thing that we're facing is the MASLD tsunami. So when we talk about this is just some projected data looking at incidence of MASLD and MASH in the United States. And so by 2050, we will see right now we're about 33%. It is estimated that 41% of Americans will have some form of MASLD. It's about 121 million people. On the right-hand side, when we look at the proportion that may end up having F4 fibrosis, that too will also rise with about a 91% increase in F4 by 2050 and about 3.5 times more decompensated cirrhosis. And just some other data that's come out there, just looking at the US burden, we're seeing, 168% increase in incident decompensated cirrhosis, as well as HCC, a very, steep increase in liver-related deaths. And our new medicines, our GLP-1 and our GLP-1 GIP receptor agonist, as well as our thyroid receptor beta agonist, these are promising therapies, right? They've been approved for a reason, and they've really been able to tackle a lot of the metabolic syndrome that's associated with these patients. But here in the short term, we don't know if they're actually going to bend these projections. They may a little bit, right? They're pretty successful. But are they going to have the same impact that the antivirals did for hepatitis C? That's really yet to be seen. We'll see that. And so MASLD is really going to be driving, increased liver referrals for not just for MASLD cirrhosis, but HCC. There's going to be a demand for simultaneous liver and kidney transplantation, especially because of the metabolic syndrome and associated diabetes and high blood pressure and the CKD that lives within these patients. And maybe even a greater need for marginal organs because we're going to have this increased demand. And so how are we going to meet it? How are we going to transplant everybody? Which then, goes directly into an argument for machine perfusion, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But aside from alcohol and MASLD, I mean, we have some other expanding indications, right? And then the rise of transplant oncology. So kind of a hot topic here in the last 5 to 10 years. HCC has traditionally been sort of the pioneer for transplant oncology, and now we're sort of trying to stretch the envelope a little bit, right? We're expanding beyond Milan. We're exploring patients who had macrovascular invasion, and then with things like systemic therapy and other modalities, if we're able to downstage them, trying to get them to transplant, right? Really trying to see how far we can push the envelope to treat these patients, especially the ones with more advanced disease, which arguably are the ones that need higher access to transplant. And then also the advent of the colorectal liver metastases here in the United States. Just last year, we came out with a new guidance that gives rather low priority, but we're starting somewhere with priority for these patients at median meal to transplant -10, and basing this loosely off the Oslo criteria that have been created. This is a growing evidence base and something that will likely be looked at in the future, and we'll likely have a changed policy for this as well as this catches on. And then finally, intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, again, a new NLRB guidance from last year where patients can get median meal to transplant -3 here in the United States. And this is, again, at its infancy, but with incoming data, we are seeing that there may be some ability to expand the criteria here, especially if we start talking about the inclusion of neoadjuvant therapy, which has had really great success in a lot of centers. And so as we look to this, right, if we were at this great pipe dream of like, oh, we have like all the organs we could want, right? Our mind shift is shifted to like, well, maybe we're not working towards cure of these patients who have some of these oncology issues, but maybe we can extend their life, and that particularly holds for things like the colorectal liver metastases in the TransMed trial that we saw those results for. And then we also have to talk about ACLF3. Ever since we've been really studying this and exploring this, it's not a secret that these patients have very, very, very high mortality on the left-hand side. This is Vinay Sundram's paper talking about ACLF 3 versus status 1A, and how they have higher waitlist mortality than status 1A patients in the first 14 days of listing. And so there's always been this push, right? And we haven't formalized anything yet, but there's this push to say, hey, there's got to be a way that we can prioritize these patients a little bit more here in the United States. On the right-hand side, this is Journal Hepatology looking at their patients who have ACLF grade based off the Cliff SOFA scores, and looking at their now long-term data at 5 years and 10-year survival, breaking it down by grades. And you can see here there's no statistical difference in their survival after liver transplantation at 5 and 10 years. And so really looking at this population as well and saying, how can we, one, prioritize them and get them access to transplant, especially if their outcomes are going to be similar to those that we consider already acceptable for transplant. So this is really talking about narrowing the supply and demand gap. This is data here that I kind of put together from just the SRTR database, and I accessed it earlier this month. Just looking at sort of, well, what's going on over time. So on the x-axis, you'll see it goes the reverse chronological order here, where we're most recent here on the left. And the light blue bar is looking at the patients that were died or too sick to receive a transplant year over year. And you can see this decrease, which is really nice. And then obviously we see this huge jump in DCDs, which are the dark blue, especially between 2023 and 2024, 2025 now. And we don't have the data yet for 2026, but we are projecting that this is going to be quite a large number of patients who are getting transplanted with DCD organs. The regular blue there is looking at discarded organs. And so, with this, that rate has still been about the same. And, it kind of ranges between anywhere from 10 to 13% of discarded organs. And so there's probably a little bit of work to do there, right? There's about 1,500 organs that are still being discarded. There's some work to be done there. But overall, like machine perfusion has been really pivotal to help close this gap or at least narrow it to where we are thinking about expanding indications for transplant.